Welcome to the Inspiration North podcast, inspiring stories from inspirational people and how they found their passion, their true north. I'm James Eves.
And I'm Michelle Minikin, and this is the Inspiration North podcast.
Joining us in this episode is Steph Edusei. We're going to hear about how to understand the critical voices in your head, also known as the imposter syndrome. Working harder than everybody won't necessarily lead to success, and how coaching can have a big impact in a short space of time.
Steph coaches female leaders and entrepreneurs who are too busy juggling the competing demands of home and work, trying to do it all and focusing on everyone and everything but themselves. These women often feel like they're constantly battling, fear that they're not good enough and that they're going to be found out, and never have time to do what they need. With real senior leadership experience from the NHS and statutory sector, Steph uses compassion, honesty and humour to support women into being a high-value leader who is both competent and confident.
Oh, welcome, Steph. Thank you for joining us. Why don't we get started with a very open question, Steph. Tell us a little bit about your journey.
I'm going to go back to childhood. I think one of the things that's probably shaped me quite a lot was growing up in Newcastle as a mixed race child. So I have a father from Ghana in West Africa. My mum's from North Shields, so I call myself an Ashanti Geordie. But actually, when I was growing up, there weren't that many black people in Newcastle. If there were, I probably knew them, and I probably called their parents auntie or uncle. In school, there were just a handful of us, and they were all kind of related in some way, shape or form, or were very close friends of the family. And I think what happened then was I kind of knew that I was different, and I always felt I didn't fit in. And that was quite a struggle, really. Although I had good friends and big friendship groups and all that type of thing, I always kept thinking, I don't fit in here. I'm the outsider. And what I now know is imposter syndrome of, at some point, somebody's going to say, you don't belong, get out. Interestingly, my siblings, they remember a lot more racism than me. I don't really recall a lot of racism, but I do recall that feeling of just being different. What was particularly difficult was when I was in amongst my black relatives, I was still different. So I was never the same as anybody. And one of the things I remember when I was a young adult, so probably in my early 20s, was I used to do children's parties. And I went to a house and there was a beautiful little mixed race girl there. And I was chatting to her and found out her dad was a doctor. And I actually knew her dad. And I spoke to him a couple of weeks later and I said, I met your daughter. She was lovely. And he said, where? I said, the party. And he went, that's what she meant. And apparently she'd gone running home and said, Daddy, there was a lady there who was just like me. And it was the first time she'd seen a mixed race adult. And that was quite a big deal for me because I thought, actually, I wish I'd had that when I was growing up. So I went through all of that. And then I wanted to be an actress. In fact, I wanted to be an actress, singer, dancer when I was growing up. And again, I think one of the reasons I didn't pursue that was I did go off to uni and study performing arts and dropped out. But I still thought I'm not like everybody else that you see. And at the time, there were very few black faces on TV, virtually none in films. If they were playing the servant. It was that type of thing. And I just thought, I'm not 6 foot tall. I'm not gorgeous. I'm not going to succeed in this. So I just gave it up. Ended up falling into a job in the NHS, literally, because my mum was a good medical secretary. They gave me the job. And just worked my way up through the NHS, did the National Management Training Scheme, and then went into a range of management jobs. And one of the things I think that I found really quite difficult was, again, this thing of, I don't belong, I need to fit in. I am different, so I need to do everything I can to make sure that nobody turns around and says, you don't belong. So I was there, I would work the hardest, I would work the longest. It was not uncommon for me as a trainee manager to be in at 8 o'clock in the morning, leaving at 8 o'clock at night, going home, having virtually nothing to eat, and then working some more at home. That was just what I did, because I thought, well, that's what managers have to do. And I have to be better than everybody else because I'm different. And that just became a habit for me, really. It was that long hours culture. Became a mother. Still worked really, really hard. I used to take holiday. At the time I was working in the ambulance service, and it was quite funny because I was the most senior woman in the ambulance service in the Northeast. And I went into operations. So operations was very male dominated. Mm-hmm. Virtually everybody had worked their way up through the ranks. And I was managing people who were, the vast majority of my team were over 50. Some were over 60. And I was in my 30s. So I was young enough to be their daughter. But so I thought, well, I can't take time off. So if I take a week off, what I'll do, if there's an important meeting, I will go along anyway. And I used to take my daughter in, and she would draw pictures on the whiteboard and stuff like that, or sit in the corner watching something on the computer whilst I was holding this important meeting, because I just thought I have to be better. I have to work harder than everyone else. And it kind of got to the point where a couple of years ago, I was really burnt out. Last summer, I was just a mess still. Nobody knew it at work, because I was functioning, they thought perfectly well at work, but actually I knew I was dropping balls all over the place. I would get out of a meeting, get in the car, cry, sort myself out, drive to the next meeting, do the meeting, get back in the car, cry. I drove home, I would sit on the drive, have a cry, pull myself together, then go in the house. And I just thought, I can't do this anymore. And that's when I started to really look at everything that I'd been taught to believe about the way that things have to be. So this whole thing about you have to work really hard. That's the only way to work. You've got to kill yourself to succeed. Rubbish. Absolute rubbish. I tackled my imposter syndrome, and I did a lot of work on that. I was just saying to somebody I'm working with at the moment, I've got it to the point now that my imposter is a joke, and I just take the mickey out of it, and that's how I deal with it now. So when it does start to shout up and tell me stuff, I just laugh at it. I use the language of, I give it a slap. I put a muzzle on it. I was
going to ask, for those who are not familiar, say, with the term imposter syndrome, how would you describe that?
It's actually really common, very common in women, very common in men when they're successful. And it's that feeling of you're just not good enough, that you don't deserve the success that you've got, and that someone's going to take that away from you. So you think, well, yes, I got that job, but actually I kind of blagged it in the interview, and they'll find out when I start to do it. And then you do the job and they say, oh, well done. And it's kind of like, yeah, that's because you didn't spot this. And when you spot it, then you'll realize that I can't do the job. And it's not just work-based either. So it can hit all elements of your life. Quite often it comes with parenthood. So it's that everybody else is a better parent than you are. And people say, oh, you're such a good mother. And it's like, yeah, but you don't see me at home. You don't. I shouted last night. And it's all of that type of stuff. And it can be all consuming. So for some people, it's just an irritant. But actually, for a lot of people, it completely undermines your confidence. It stops you for going for things. So you kind of, you look at something and you go, well, I could do that. No, I couldn't. I can't prove that I can do that. It's this thing of, you look at a job description and you go, oh, well, there's 2 things I can't do, so I better not apply for it. And that's far more common in women than it is in men. Yeah. So it's all of that thing. And the amount of people, I mean, Michelle Obama's just been talking about the fact that she had it. Albert Einstein, apparently, they think he had it. Mm-hmm. Maya Angelou had it. So really successful people, they all experience imposter syndrome.
All the Harry Potter children, adults now, they all had it because it was like an accident. They weren't very good at acting, So they've all come out and said that.
Yeah, it is so common. And as I say, it can really be quite crippling. And one of the things is I work with these fantastic women who've achieved a lot. And then you talk to them and they're so completely bound up in this terror. And I think if you could free yourself of that, you could have taken over the world.
Definitely. So what made you sort of go from senior leadership in, the ambulance service, NHS, and what's that journey between that and you being a coach?
Well, I actually trained as a coach when I was in the NHS. So there was a real push to have internal coaches in the NHS and to have coaching styles of leadership. And it was just something I've always been interested in, organisational development and developing people. And one of my biggest irritants and joys is when I train somebody up and then they leave. And it's kind of like, oh, you were really great. But I'm really happy that they've then gone on to do something better. So that I wanted to do the coaching for that. But I left the NHS 4 years ago. I'd reached the point where my qualities weren't being recognised. So this was on the back of the whole 2010 reforms. Managers in the NHS had been publicly vilified. And it was kind of, if you're not a clinician, you don't know what you're talking about. And that really hit at me because I thought, I really took pride in the fact that I was a really good manager. I was a fantastic manager. And all of my knowledge was just disregarded completely by colleagues who were clinicians. And that was really difficult. But also the organisation that I worked in, the people that were at the very top of that, there was some real value issues for me. So a lot of them were from primary care, and whilst there are some GPs who are great, some of them felt that this was about, I'm not going to do something unless I'm paid to do it. And that's not my approach at all. My approach is it's for the greater good. And I really struggled with that, and it was starting to really affect me. And I just thought, I've got to leave. So I left. I took on a role with Health Watch, which is a consumer watchdog for health and social care. So I run Health Watch in Newcastle and now in Gateshead. But I also started doing management consultancy, mainly back in the NHS, I must admit. And that was a bit soul destroying because what I kept being asked to do was stuff that I'm good at, but I hate, like writing specifications and policies and just soul destroying stuff. It's not the stuff that sets me on fire. And when I was going through this journey over the last year or so, I thought, I want to do this. I want to help people. So I've really pushed the coaching now to the forefront. That's what I do now. I can do the management consultancy side of things if people want me to do something, but I would be really choosy about what I did. It's the coaching that I love. That's what I kind of, when I know I'm coaching the next day, it's kind of like, yay, little dance. Because it's just so exciting. And when you see somebody who has made that shift and they actually start to look different. Just one of my clients this week, 5 weeks, and she looks so different from how she looked when she first started. Now, that's not wholly down to me. She's doing a lot of other stuff as well. But she is just transforming in front of my eyes, and that's a brilliant feeling.
Yeah, that's great.
What, excuse me, who would be the people you tend to work with? Are there certain challenges they're faced with? What are they trying to achieve or accomplish that you're allowed to help them with?
It varies really. So quite often women will come to me because they are too busy. So that'll be the first thing. They say, oh, I'm just way too busy and I've my life's out of control. I need to get control of that. So recently I did a time management challenge on Facebook, and a lot of women signed up for this challenge. Interestingly, a lot of them I've had to chase to complete it because they're too busy. So that's, it was kind of like, yeah, I knew that was going to happen. And so then they'll come for an issue like that, and what they want to do is to get control of their time. But what I then find is that one of the reasons that they're so busy is because they keep saying yes to stuff. They keep saying yes to stuff because they haven't got the confidence to say no. And the reason they haven't got the confidence to say no is because they've got imposter syndrome. And they think if they say no, people will go, I knew you weren't up to the job. So the same issues come up time after time after time, but they might come from different routes. It's generally, I generally say I work with female leaders and entrepreneurs. And the reason for that is that I'm not an entry-level coach. And some people love working with people at an entry level, but that's just not my thing. Entry-level people tend to need a lot more support on the practicalities of how to do things. What I want is somebody, they know how to manage a team or whatever, but what they're doing is they're struggling with all of the emotional stuff and the capacity to be able to do it. They don't need the, right, so this is how you deal with an HR issue. That's what somebody else deals with. And I've found that in doing that, I'm actually becoming far better at what I do because I'm specialising in something that really interests me, really ignites my passion, but addresses a very definite need.
So if you could go back and talk to your 18-year-old self, what advice would you give her?
I'd say, you know that voice that's talking in your ear all the time? It's a stupid little green, spindly, spiky creature, and you just need to put it in its box and tell it to shut up. Because my whole life has been shaped by that. When I look back, I think I limited myself so much. You know, I mean, when I think about that girl that I was pretty awesome as a youngster. And yet I kind of allowed that to be taken away by that inner voice. And at the time, it didn't seem like that because it seemed like that was the rational thing to do. It was the logical thing to do. But it wasn't. It was just that inner voice telling me. So I'd say just put the muzzle on it, give it a slap, and just carry on. Put your big girl knickers on and get on with it.
That's brilliant. Okay, so if you hadn't had that imposter syndrome, where do you think you'd be now?
Oh, I'd be dancing on the West End stage, darling. I don't know, actually. I mean, I like to think that I would have gone ahead and pursued what was my first love, which was acting, singing and dancing. But actually, and this is one of the things I kind of, whilst I wish I'd kicked my imposter syndrome into touch, I don't regret anything that I've experienced. So, you know, I've been through some great stuff. I've been through some rubbish in my life, but it's made me who I am. And I don't know if I'd kind of gone off and gone to drama school or whatever and had pursued that, would I be the person I am now? And I like the person I am now. So I don't know. I'd like to think that whatever happened, I would still be, you know, a good human being, that I'd still have the same values and things like that. And the way life is, I may well have been doing exactly what I'm doing now. Yeah. I never thought I was going to work for the NHS, never mind end up doing the range of jobs that I've done. So I just don't know. But as I say, I kind of like where I am. I like who I am. There's always room for improvement, so I keep working on myself. But I know I'm the type of person I would like to know, and I would like to have as a friend, and that's really important to me. So yeah, still improving, but I'd like to think that I would be. Maybe I'd have an Oscar under my belt and now be doing what I'm doing. That would be quite nice.
But you're doing a little bit of dancing at the moment, though.
I am, yes, dance teacher, and I do I've been doing a burlesque class, which has just been hilarious and actually great for confidence. Absolutely fantastic for confidence, because quite a while since I've performed. Not that I'm performing in burlesque, I hasten to add, but you kind of have to perform in when in the classes. So that's been really, really good fun. And again, just kind of, I think this thing of, if you fancy doing something, give it a try, because you don't know. I'm actually going to take up Latin and ballroom in the new year as well, because I've never done Latin and ballroom. Mm-hmm. So that's another new thing that I'm going to do. And it's just kind of adding to my fun in my life. I've spent a lot of time focused on work. Mm-hmm. My daughter's of an age now where actually she doesn't really want me around most of the time. So actually being able to do stuff that's fun for me is really quite important now. It's filling me up, because some of the stuff that I do can still be quite harrowing, quite difficult. So that importance of keeping yourself filled up so you've got those reserves to pull on is really, really important for me.
That's great. Thank you.
I suppose for anyone who's listening, something's resonated, having a coach that helps someone to open up, what do you think is a crucial piece of advice for someone who finds themselves as the busy mother, the busy manager? What would you suggest?
Well, I would say get some support, because it's not easy to do it yourself. One of the key things I bring as a coach actually is accountability, because what you tend to find is as well as having all of the busyness and the imposter syndrome and all that type of thing, we tend to be quite obliging people. So we do stuff for other people, but then when it comes to us, we're way down on the priorities. And actually, I get quite cross when somebody says, oh, my kids come first, then my husband, then me. And I go, no. You need to come first, because if you don't put yourself first, you're not going to be there for your husband and your kids. So we do that accountability that a coach will bring, that kind of says, right, you said you were going to do this and you haven't done that. Why? And it's not in a nasty way. It's about trying to get to the bottom of why did that not happen? Sometimes we can fool ourselves. I'm very good at doing that at times. So actually having an external person there who will sit and go, just keep pushing, just keep picking away at that, because we can kind of go, well, that's not really important, and I'll start talking about something else. So really focusing in on that. But I think the important thing that I would say, or the first thing that somebody needs to do, is they need to stop and just notice if there's a voice going. So I always say with imposter syndrome, it's a bit like having the radio on or the TV on when you're doing something else. It's there. And if somebody said to you a couple of hours later and asked you a question about something that was on, you would probably be able to say something about it because it's going in, but you're not really focused on it. And that's what that inner voice is. It's talking to you constantly, but you're not. You don't notice that you're listening to it, but you're listening to it. So I always say to people, the first thing you need to do is you need to stop listening to the voice and start noticing it. So it's that thing of every time it talks, you kind of go, oh, there it is. There it is again. It's gone again. And that is really, really important, because once you start noticing it's there, you start realizing just how much control it's had over your life. And sometimes that in itself can be enough for you to start taking back control. So I'd normally say that's the best first thing you can do. But do get somebody who's going to be there to challenge you, to support you, to kind of create that safe environment for you to talk about stuff that actually quite often we don't want to talk about. And it can be difficult talking about with your loved ones or your close friends, because they've got their own stuff going on. They've got their own narrative that they want to bring. Somebody like a coach is there for you and only for you. They don't have an agenda to bring. So that's why that's quite important.
Excellent. Thank you for that. Is there anything else you'd like to tell the audience of our thousands of listeners, hopefully?
I think I would say that most of us will be experiencing this in one way, shape or form. I've come across very few people who say that they don't. And what they normally say is, oh yes, I recognise that and I've learned how to manage it. So talk about it with each other. And that's a really brave thing to do, because the big thing about imposter syndrome is you think that you're the one that's incompetent and everybody else is so much better than you. So then to say, you know what, I feel like I'm incompetent is quite a big deal, because you're expecting everyone else to say, yes, you are.
It's very vulnerable, isn't it?
It is. But actually, use somebody like Maya Angelou, Michelle Obama, whoever, and say, I've heard that they suffered from this and I kind of recognise some of that as well. What about you? Because the more we talk about it, then the smaller it becomes. Like I say, with my creature, as I call it, it's now become just this comical little creature that I slap and kick and muzzle. I'm quite violent towards it, actually, thinking about it. But it has become a bit of a cartoon character now. The more we talk about it, the more it diminishes it. And what I would love is that we get to the point where people like my daughter, who's just turned 14, just don't have it, or they know how to deal with it. So they don't have to go through all the kind of few years that I've had to deal with it since I was a teenager.
Excellent, thank you. I feel the need to tell you what my imposter syndrome is called.
Go on.
It's Mrs. Norris. You know, that horrible cat from Harry Potter. I was like, oh, there she goes again.
I haven't been able to give mine a name, actually. And I don't, it is just the creature. And I don't know whether for me giving it a name would make it too
also
nice.
Harry Potter.
Yeah, it is actually, isn't it? But yeah, and mine doesn't have a gender. But it's interesting when I'm coaching people and I get them to describe their thing, their voice. Sometimes I can actually feel quite sick as they're doing it because they can be really sinister. But actually the process of describing it sometimes actually gets them to start to characterize it. And then it does become, like say this cartoon strip type thing. I realised mine, I started to look at it a bit like the style of the Jetsons. That old cartoon where they were all like just a bit weird looking. That's what mine's starting to look like. It looks like it could be in the Jetsons. So, yeah.
That's great.
Well, I guess we can wrap up there. Very much appreciate you coming in to see us, Steph. Perhaps we can mention your website.
Yeah. If
that's of interest, you can get in touch. It's a newviewconsultancy.com. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks everyone for listening. Check out all the show notes at inspirationnorth.com. Join us again for the next episode when we'll be chatting to another inspirational person. If you like this, subscribe and tell your friends. If you didn't like this, subscribe anyway and tell everybody.